Hi, friends. I'm Rebecca Faust, and this is What We Don't Say, where we have honest conversations about fear, patterns, growth, what it looks like to reconnect with yourself. In other words, all the things we experience but don't typically say out loud. I'm so glad you're here. Let's dive in. Hi, friends. Today, I want to talk about something I think almost every high achiever experiences, and yet we don't talk about it very often. Failure. Another big F word. Or today, more specifically, I want to talk about why failure feels so personal. Have you ever noticed that two people can experience the exact same setback and one person shrugs it off while the other replays it for weeks, months, years? Why is that? I don't think it's because one person actually cares more than the other, even though I'm pretty sure I told myself that in the past. And I don't think it's because one person is stronger than the other. I think it's because many of us learned a long time ago that failure means something about who we are. Not just what happened, who we are. And that changes everything. If you've listened to some of the earlier episodes, you've heard me talk about survival mechanism, the part of us whose job it is to keep us safe, to keep us inside our comfort zone, away from things that feel quote unquote dangerous. One of the things our survival mechanism learns very early on is failure has consequences, sometimes real consequences. Bad grades, not making the team, getting rejected, feeling embarrassed, being corrected, being left out, being passed over, getting fired. And our survival mechanism doesn't distinguish very well at all between this is uncomfortable versus this is dangerous. These consequences threaten belonging, and belonging is survival. So our survival mechanism starts doing exactly what it's designed to do. Avoid failure at all costs. Avoid embarrassment, rejection, avoid looking foolish, disappointing people, avoid being wrong. And many of the patterns we've talked about in previous episodes start to make a lot more sense. People pleasing, perfectionism, over preparing, overthinking, overworking, rushing to the how, saying, I don't know. None of those patterns exist because we're weak. They exist because somewhere along the way, they worked. They worked as strategies to avoid failure, or more accurately, to avoid what we've made and what we think failure means about us. I don't think most of us were taught that failure was information. I think most of us were taught that failure was bad. And again, this is not about blame. It's not about our parents, teachers, coaches. It's just the system most of us grew up in. And in fairness, I think the system was designed with the best intentions in mind. But we got rewarded for good grades, honor roll, AP classes, awards, certificates, recognition. We, or our survival mechanism, learned very quickly success gets rewarded. Failure gets corrected and often special attention. We were taught to measure performance, and many of us accidentally learned to measure our self-worth. If you're listening to this thinking, oh my gosh, I do this, I do not want your takeaway to be, Great. Here's another thing I'm doing wrong. That's not the point of this. I want your takeaway to be, of course I do this. This makes sense. End of story. End of meaning. One of the biggest shifts for me was realizing that there is this difference between the event and the meaning. The event happened. The meaning was created by yours truly. And most of the suffering comes from the meaning. For example, I got a C plus. That's an event. I'll never amount to anything. That's meaning I assign. I got rejected. That's an event. I'm not good enough. That's meaning I assign. Someone didn't hire me. That's an event. Maybe I'm not meant to do this. That's meaning I assign. The event and the meaning often easily get so tangled together so quickly, we don't even realize they're separate. One of the first earliest examples I can remember this was the first and only time I got a C plus in a class. I was 16. I was in AP classes. I was in all of the classes with all of the smart kids. And I can still remember the day after we were given our official marking period's grades. I was shocked and embarrassed. How could I do this? At first, I couldn't even believe it was real. I assumed there had to be some sort of curve coming. We couldn't all have gotten C's, could we? And honestly, I thought my life was over. Looking back, that's a little funny, but it definitely didn't feel funny at the time. It felt devastating. Not because of the grade itself, but because of what I made the grade mean. I made it mean I'd never amount to anything. I wasn't smart enough. I'd never get into a good college. I'd somehow ruined my entire future. The grade wasn't the real problem. The meaning I gave it was. Fast forward, one of the clearest examples of this in my adult life has been fertility. The miscarriages were painful, both physically and mentally, emotionally. The fertility struggles were painful. IVF has been painful physically, emotionally, mentally. But when I look back, I can see that there were two layers of pain. One was the experience itself. Again, IVF, needles, schedules, bruises, side effects from the hormones. All of that was real. It was an event, an experience. And then there was the story I attached to it. I started making that experience mean something about me. I made it mean I wasn't enough, that I was failing my husband and our families. I made it mean I was somehow less valuable, less lovable. To be clear, I wasn't waking up every day thinking, Rebecca, you're worthless. Instead, it was quieter. It sounded like, if I were enough, this would be working. It didn't feel like a story. It felt like a fact. And that's what shame does. It convinces us that the meaning we've attached to something is simply the truth. But IVF wasn't familiar. Feeling like a failure was. So I didn't just grieve, I judged. And those are two very different experiences with very different impacts. A little lighter, other story or example I have for myself is when I started my coaching business. Someone inevitably would say no to moving forward with me as their coach. And within 30 seconds, I'd be thinking, the universe must be trying to tell me I'm not supposed to do this. These no's felt enormous. not because I desperately needed every client, but because every no felt like evidence. I made every no be evidence that maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't meant to do this. Thought every no was evidence that maybe I was doing it wrong. Again, the event, someone said no. The meaning, maybe I'm not good enough. Those are not the same thing. But my survival mechanism treated them like they were. The reason I wanted to talk about this isn't so we can start or continue to blame ourselves or blame our parents or society. The reason I want to talk about this is because I think understanding how we got here matters. When we understand how we got here, we can stop treating these reactions like character flaws. We can begin to stop wondering, what's wrong with me? Why am I so sensitive? Why do I care so much? Why can't I just move on? And instead, we can start to think or begin to see that, of course, this feels threatening. My brain has been practicing this interpretation for decades. My survival mechanism is just doing that thing it does. That doesn't mean it's true, but it does mean it makes sense. And I think, and I've seen, that there's something incredibly compassionate and powerful about that realization. The older I get, the less interested I am in asking myself or anyone else, did I fail? And the more interested I am in asking, what did I make this mean? Today, I see failure differently. If a client tells me I failed, I do not automatically see failure. I see someone who tried, someone who experimented, who stretched. I see someone who learned, who was willing to risk something. And we'll talk more about this in the next episode because I think a lot of us could benefit from a fresh definition of failure. As always, I love to leave you with a few questions to either think about or potentially talk about out loud with yourself or someone else. And those are, what failure are you still carrying? What did you make it mean about yourself? Is that what actually happened? Or is that the meaning you've attached to what happened? If your best friend experienced the same thing, what would you make it mean about them? And what if the event and your worth are actually two separate things? Remember, the event was real. The disappointment was real. The grief, probably real. The setback may have been real. The event deserves compassion. The conclusions, the meanings we've attached to the event, they deserve curiosity. Because a failed attempt is not proof you're a failure. A setback is not proof you're not enough. A rejection is not proof you're unlovable. And one outcome does not get to decide your worth. The good news is that anything learned can be unlearned. And next week, that's why I want to talk about what failure might actually be in a helpful way. Take care, friends. Be well. I will see you next time.